The Corvette C7 Z06. It's a rather impressive piece of machinery. It's funny because I've had one in my garage for the past 3 years or so, but I never really bothered to do a full review on it. Probably because there were a bunch of other reviews floating around YouTube and I just didn't feel like I'd be contributing anything. I did, however, do a 60 to 130 acceleration test, an in-depth comparison between the automatic and manual transmissions, as well as a few track days. But today, we're going to do a long-term owner's review. Why? Well, because my time with her is just about up and it's probably best that I move on to other things. I'm going to use our grading system as a basis for the review, but I also want to talk about stuff that people don't normally cover. A lot of you who followed me for a while know that I owned both the manual and the automatic Z06, so I'm going to give some additional insight there. Let's start with the important stuff. Engine, power, and exhaust note. Unless you've lived under a rock for the past 5 years, these numbers here won't surprise you. The Z06 comes with a 6.2-liter supercharged V8 making a solid 650 brake horsepower and 650 pounds of torque. It's quite impressive on paper, with a sub 3 second 0 to 60 and a high 10-second quarter-mile time. I've seen a good number of reports in the forums where people are running high 10s pretty consistently at 125 to 127 miles per hour. In terms of 60 to 130, I've been able to put down high 7-second times in both the auto and manual versions, so it's a quick car for sure. But do keep in mind that the car tends to pull timing after a couple hero runs and you won't be getting peak performance. In automatic cars, they usually dyno around 550 wheel, and the manual cars will dyno closer to 570, so there's quite a bit of parasitic loss from the transmission. But what impresses me the most is how it delivers all that power. There's no real lag, so the torque is almost instantaneous. And you can pretty much punch it from anywhere between 2000 RPM and the red line, and you'll find yourself going quick in no time. It's fun, but it can be rather scary sometimes if you're not used to it. But it's really hard to enjoy driving around on the street with all that power, especially where I am in the Northeast because it's under 60 degrees half the time here and the roads are crap. One common complaint is that you're going to get some mild throttle lag, which is slightly more apparent in the automatic than the manual variants. Many people solve this with a simple ported throttle body modification. The exhaust note is quintessential American muscle. It's no refined, high-revving European machine, but that's not what we're buying here. We buy Corvettes for that deep growl that will scare children from a mile away. And you know, it does its job quite well. I will be frank though, I do think a Hellcat sounds better stock for stock. On top of that, the engine bay is so insulated and the exhaust note is so pronounced that you don't really hear much supercharger whine inside the cabin. And that's kind of disappointing because that's really what makes supercharged cars kind of enjoyable. The good thing is that the exhaust is adjustable, but even if you set it to silent, the valves still open at full throttle after 3500 RPM. In my 2019, I noticed that my exhaust had more burbles and backfires on deceleration, so that's pretty cool. I really want to give it a 10, but because of that throttle lag and lack of supercharger whine, I think 9 is going to have to be the score for both cars. Let's move on to transmission and paddles. Sadly, this is probably the biggest downfall for the car. The GM8L90 is a conventional 8-speed automatic, not a dual clutch transmission or anything like that, which is fine because we've seen some pretty terrific examples from ZF and high-powered cars, so we know that the planetary automatic can get the job done. The gearbox itself is not bad either. It can handle a boatload of power. We're talking about like 800 to 900 wheel horsepower according to forum posts, so that's pretty impressive. On top of that, Chevy is claiming that it's faster than Porsche's PDK. Now, there's no way for us to really test that because it happens so quick that it doesn't even register on the V-Box anymore. The real problem comes from the way the transmission is tuned. It's rather atrocious. I go into it in depth in my manual versus automatic comparison video, but basically what ends up happening is that the computer takes about half a second to register a gear change, even after activating a paddle. I can accept that in an econo box like a Kia, but in a high-performance sports car? No. See, what ends up happening is that you slam into the fuel cutoff thinking that your car is going to shift for you before that, but you end up losing the race. On top of hitting the limiter, the car needs you to drop down to about 6,000 RPM before it'll let you upshift again. So what ends up happening is you lose about a second there. And what it feels like is missing a gear in an automatic. The paddles themselves are okay. They're a little dinky, but not the worst thing to happen. You do expect a little bit more from a flagship sports car. The Camaro also uses the same paddles for anyone who's asking about the extensions that I have, which do help to improve the overall paddle feel on top of looking a little bit more dramatic. You can avoid all these issues by simply getting the 7-speed manual, which is invariably a better transmission. The throws are relatively short, the engagement is extremely satisfying, rev matching, super fun. Sure, given equal drivers, the automatic is going to be slightly faster to 130, but if you know how to drive or you plan on modifying your car, the manual is actually geared slightly better for big boy half-mile racing. Ultimately, I'd say that the automatic gets a 6 and the manual gets a 10. Moving on, handling, steering, and braking. There is this connotation that American cars can't handle. And while that might have been true for older Mustangs and Camaros, this was never really the case for Corvettes, at least not since the C5 generation. From a chassis standpoint, the C7Z has put on a little bit of weight, and she's not exactly the girl she used to be at around 3,100 pounds. But it doesn't mean it's any less capable. Technology these days has figured out a way to overcome physics. On NJMP Thunderbolt, there's a video of someone out there running 126 in a stock Z06, and that's rather insane. I've gotten down to 131 myself, and for those who are familiar with that track, 130 there is sort of the golden time everybody aims for. The additional aero does play a huge role here too, especially on high-speed corners. If you couple that with the magnetic suspension and all the different computer-enhanced race modes, you get a highly capable car in even an average driver's hands. And I don't even have the Z07 package car, which is supposedly more track-focused. So from a handling standpoint, it's quite a beast. So next time somebody pulls the American cars can't handle card, just laugh and walk away. But you do have to be careful. With 650 horsepower and rear-wheel drive, it will step out on you, even with very mild throttle modulation. Steering, on the other hand, leaves a little bit to be desired. It's electronically adjustable through the drive modes, but it's really nothing to write home about. In Tour and Sport, it feels more like a GT car than a sports car, which is fine, that's the point. But even in track mode, I'd say it's still not as heavy as I'd like it to be. Communication and feedback is good though, and confidence at the limit is high. The good thing is that you can customize the suspension to Tour and the steering to track for a compliant but sporty ride. Braking is solid in this car, no complaints here. The pedal is not very firm, but the brakes themselves have a lot of bite, and will stop you no matter what. Yes, the car weighs 3,600 pounds, but the 6 pistons in the front and 4 pistons in the rear do a fantastic job. For the track guys, don't even bother with the carbon ceramics. It's a waste of money since you'll have to spend more than you pay to replace them if you go hard. Steel is the way to go, but the only problem I've encountered is that if you use a tire and wheel combo that slightly deviates from OEM specs, the car will go into ice mode under sudden hard braking, and it's kind of terrifying if you like to late brake on the track or if you don't have much runoff. For those of you who don't know what ice mode is, it's basically when your brake pedal becomes hard because the car thinks it's on ice, and your braking abilities are diminished dramatically. The only way to reset it is to get your foot off the brakes completely and reapply. Overall, this category still gets a 9 out of 10. The beautiful thing about magnetic shocks is that it's really rather adjustable. Besides the ability to tune it for whatever track situation you're in, the Z06 also produces a very compliant ride in Tour mode, which is the comfort/everyday setting. The cool thing is, since the car is on leaf springs, you can effectively turn the bolts and lower the ride height if you want a super slammed look. And from my experience, it doesn't really make the ride any harsher. Of all the two-door sports cars I've driven, I always find the Z06 to have the most comfortable ride, with maybe the second-gen R8 V10 Plus as a runner-up. But therein lies the problem. The 2019 Z06s have revised suspension tuning, which makes it perhaps a bit too comfortable. Even in track mode, I find it to be way too relaxed for what is supposed to be a race setting. This wasn't an issue in my 17 C7Z, where the difference between Tour and track was pretty noticeable. I think that was mainly because the track mode was too stiff and caused a lot of bent OEM wheels in street driving conditions, so GM decided to rectify it by making everything a little softer. This leads me to another issue, which is subjective because, I like my sports car stiff in the aggressive drive modes. And though the car is still plenty capable, it ends up feeling more like a GT car than a track-focused machine, which is one of the reasons why I'm disappointed in the C7Z. It kind of strayed away from its roots as a track-ready sports car. I don't know about you, but if I wanted a GT car, I probably wouldn't have bought a Z06. Now it feels too much like a fast, long-distance highway cruiser than a precise sports car. That said, this can all be fixed with some aftermarket tuning. Anyway, that's all subjective in my personal point of view, so it shouldn't detract any points at all. Objectively, the ride quality and suspension gets a 10. Let's talk about the interior now. This is a department where the Americans get a lot of flack, and I feel like the C7 generation, improved upon that a lot, and the C8 even more so. For what is effectively an $80,000 car, there's nothing terrible to say. Take a look for yourself. Even after 6 years of service, this car still feels modern. You get a digital dash that has different display modes, dual climate control, flat bottom steering wheel, heated and cooled seats if you opt for the 2LZ package, a heads-up display, remote start, and a pretty bangin' Bose sound system. On top of that, all the materials look good, and if you get the base trim, there's quite a bit of plastic floating around. It can feel a bit cheap, but we are in a Chevy, not a Bentley. So for the money you pay, I have to say the interior is pretty on point. My only complaint would be the seats. They aren't the most comfortable, not the most plush, and they don't have the most lumbar support for track work. They're just sort of good enough to get the job done. Of course you can upgrade to the competition seats, which look pretty badass, but if you're not in the best shape of your life, you may not have a good time. That said, cargo space though, pretty damn impressive. If you open the back, you get so much room that you could probably hide a few bodies, make a few Home Depot runs, or take all your friends' golf clubs, whatever your cup of tea may be. But for me, the coolest thing has to be the hidden compartment behind the nav screen. I wish for 85 grand you got heated seats, but other than that, it's pretty nice in here. I'll give it a 9 out of 10. Next up we have driver engagement, and I hate to say it, but the Z06 isn't very engaging to drive. Sure, you always have to be on your toes with that 650 horsepower, but with the automatic, you don't really feel like you're one with the machine. And even in track mode, there's no sense of immediacy. It's just sluggish and uninspiring. Things are a little bit better with the manual because you have to physically roll your own gears, which inherently makes it more engaging. But I'd say overall steering input is good. It's not winning any awards, but the suspension is kind of mediocre, even in track mode. The one saving grace that really makes it fun is the exhaust note. I think it sounds magnificent on up and down shifts or even just half throttle. You know, that just makes it a blast to drive. Overall, I think the automatic's gonna get a 6 and the manual gets a 9. As for exterior design, the Corvette has come a long way. It's a great looking car with all the right proportions. Low profile, long hood line, aggressive wheels, wide hips with the Euro style lights. If base Corvettes weren't so common, the Z06 could be mistaken for an Italian supercar. On top of that, the Stage 3 aero components really add to the look. Every time I park the car somewhere, I can't help but look back at it. I feel like as a car enthusiast, that's sort of the true test of whether or not you think your car is attractive. But beyond that, I feel like the Z06, well, the C7 platform in general, aged really well. If you asked me to improve on the design, I'd probably say a more aggressive front bumper or, add a diffuser, but honestly, I'm nitpicking at that point. This thing gets a 10 out of 10 in exterior design. As we get into our last few categories, I realize that this may be the end of the road for Corvettes for me for a while. As some of you may know, I canceled my C8 order a little while back, mainly because the delay was too long. Originally I was told March, but with everything going on in the world, I'm not even sure I would get the car until late summer. My price was MSRP, and I realized that in this economy, that's not sensible. The hype wore off for me, but maybe I'll come back around for the C8 Z06. Anyway, let's talk about curb value. And that's the biggest issue I see with this car. As great as it performs and as awesome as it looks, the design has been around for a little while and people are sort of used to it. I find that to the general public, it's just another Corvette. They don't see a supercar slaying machine that represented the pinnacle of American automotive engineering. They see a good looking car that the average American can strive to attain. It's ultimately not going to get the same attention as some of its rivals like the R8 or AMG GT. And even to some of my fellow car enthusiasts, the Z06 is often underappreciated. I do get some lookers here and there, but the people who can really appreciate it are other Corvette owners. So here, at the end of the day, curb value gets a 6 out of 10. As for warranty and aftermarket, it's pretty standard stuff here. 3-year, 36,000 miles for the bumper to bumper, which is kind of the bare minimum these days. The good thing is that GM does warranty the car for pretty much anything, even if you take it to the track. The only obvious exception is if you tune the car, and GM is religiously strict on the tune situation. An ECU or TCU tune will result in a car's powertrain warranty being flagged and voided automatically, even if you flash it back to stock because they use a flash counter to keep track. No matter how many beers you bring your service advisor, you're not going to get away with it. The good news is that you can easily gain a solid 30 to 40 horsepower from 3 bolt-on mods that won't affect the warranty. A cold air intake, ported throttle body, and X-pipe have been a proven combo for significant gains without having to tune. But if you don't care for your warranty, or you're out of warranty, the car literally has endless potential. You can go FBO and make around 700 wheel, or just go completely ham, put on a Pro Charger or Whipple and make north of 1,000 horsepower for less than 10 grand. And if something blows up, parts for this thing are everywhere. Speaking of blowing up, reliability has been solid. Overheating issues at the track are limited to the automatic gearbox. I've only put about 8,000 miles between the two cars, but half of those miles are track miles, so it should be relatively robust. All things considered, I'll give it a 9. Our last category is value and price. I don't have to spell it out for you. The bang for the buck on this car is unreal. This 1LZ car MSRP'd at 84 grand, but 2 and 3 LZ packages can end up costing around 100 grand for a decent spec. The good thing is that the Z06s were almost always heavily discounted. In most cases, you can get them 15 to 20% off if they've been sitting on the lot for a while. So realistically, they can be bought for around 70 grand without much negotiation. Of course, the depreciation is brutal if you bought the car at MSRP or if you get a really good high spec. For most people, a 1 or 2 LZ is generally enough. If you paid less than 80 grand for this car, even brand new, you got a good deal. Overall, bang for buck, easy 10 out of 10. As I bid farewell, I have to conclude this with the smiles per gallon bonus. If I could do this all over again, I probably wouldn't have gotten the automatic. It's not as engaging to drive, it doesn't feel special, and overall, the experience fell short of my expectations. The manual on the other hand was a blast. I wanted to drive the car whenever I could because rolling the gears was so satisfying. And to be frank, if I still had that manual, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. That car would stay in my garage for as long as I could still breathe. The auto gets a 0, and the manual gets the full 5. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know by leaving a thumbs up and comment below. Also, don't forget to take a look at our merch store and support the channel. And if this is your first time here, check out some of my other stuff. I produce high quality cinematic car content, so if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button and ring that bell icon for new episodes every Thursday. Thanks for watching.